Hey guys, tonight we step into a place where time moves by bells. The walls smell faintly of old stone and beeswax, and the deepest dramas involve missing sandals and overcooked barley. You wake in darkness, real darkness, not the kind that's interrupted by a neighbor's porch light or the faint glow of a phone screen, but the thick velvet black kind that presses against your face like a woolen hood. This is a medieval monastery. You probably won't survive this, not because of war, pestilence, or heresy, but because you haven't had breakfast and the bell for Matins rings at what feels like 2:17 a.m. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And drop your location and the current time in the comments. I want to know which time zone my fellow sleepwalkers are in. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The bell rings again. One long note, no melody, no warmth, just a flat clang that says, get up, pray. Try not to bump into the stone bench again. You swing your legs over the side of your cot. The straw mattress crunches like dry autumn leaves. Your toes find cold flagstones. You wince. Regret nothing. You're alive. And your only obligation this morning is to chant before the sun rises. You pull your robe around you, wool, undyed, and slightly itchy. There's a draft in your cell. There's always a draft. Scholars still argue whether medieval monks were ever truly warm, or if warmth was seen as a spiritual distraction. You fumble for your wooden sandals. One is mysteriously damp. You don't ask. You just step into them and shuffle into the hallway, joining the sound of others doing the same. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some monasteries built long sloping ramps instead of stairs, not for accessibility, but so monks could shuffle more quietly to prayer. Even the architecture wanted you to whisper. The cloister hallway is lit by one torch every 10 feet. Shadows leap across the stone. A brother coughs, quietly. Someone's sandal slaps a little too loudly. A door creaks open and closes with the soft resignation of a man who knows there's porridge in his near future. You enter the chapel. It's cool, hushed, gently glowing with candlelight. Incense lingers from last night's compline. You take your place on the bench, cold, slightly too narrow, and polished by centuries of reluctant sitting. The prior begins the chant. You follow. You mumble. You pretend you're more awake than you are. The psalms spill out in Latin, slow and rhythmic, filling the stone chamber with a kind of warm fog. You catch every third word. You're reasonably sure one of them was about sheep. The service goes on. You kneel. You stand. You kneel again. Your knees pop like twigs. You look around. Most eyes are closed. Some in concentration, some because their owners are asleep. And still, the chant continues. The same words, in the same order, at the same time, every day, since before you remembered how to spell your own name. And it's comforting. The predictability, the slow melody, the low drone of monks half singing, half sleeping through the darkness, just waiting for the next bell. You feel your breath slow. You forget what day it is, but the bell knows, and it will remind you again and again. You sit a little straighter as the final verse begins, your voice joining the others in something almost like harmony. The bell rings once more. Matins ends, and the day begins. You shuffle out of the chapel into the pre-dawn chill, your breath fogging slightly in the corridor as stone walls exhale centuries of stored midnight. The silence between services is sacred and also extremely helpful for hiding the fact that you just yawned loud enough to frighten a passing cat. The corridor is narrow, the floor worn smooth, where generations of half-asleep monks have drifted like somber moths between matins and the next obligation. You know the path by feel more than sight. One turn, then another. Then a low arch where you always duck instinctively, even though you've only hit your head once. This week, you re-enter the chapel for lauds. Yes, more prayer. Still dark outside. But now there's a sense of soft gathering, a little more awareness, a hint of rustling. The candles burn lower, fatter. The floor is colder, or maybe your socks have stopped doing their job. A mainstream historical fact. Lauds was traditionally prayed just before dawn, part of the canonical hours marking the rhythm of monastic life, along with matins and the rest. Prime, terce, sext, none, vespers, and compline. It divided the day not by tasks, but by devotion. Your schedule, in essence, was built around someone else's calendar. God's. You take your place again. Same bench. Slightly warmer now. The chant begins anew, this time with psalms meant to anticipate the sunrise. You say the words. You don't think about them too hard. That's not the point. You glance at Brother Thomas. He's nodding off in rhythm with the chant. Impressive. You nudge him with your elbow. He blinks, mutters something that might be Latin, and returns to chanting with the slow determination of a man who has memorized everything but the time. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some monasteries used sand-filled hourglasses to time their prayers. Not because they doubted divine scheduling, but because Brother Aelred was known to occasionally accelerate the psalms when he was especially hungry. Lauds continues. You kneel again, hands folded. You think briefly about the birds just starting to stir beyond the cloister wall. You think about the warm spot on the bench left by Brother Matthew. You think about porridge. Not yet. The final antiphon is sung. The bell rings. Again. It always rings. You stand slowly, your joints making a sound that, if translated, would probably be something like, "Why?" And then you move, in single file, out of the chapel. This next part is your favorite. Silence. Not the silence of prayer, or the strained hush of shared worship, but the honest quiet of monks walking toward breakfast. A line of men in wool, in various states of spiritual alertness, all moving toward the promise of something warm, something edible, something vaguely resembling nutrition. You breathe deeper now. The air smells faintly of wood smoke and oats. You round a final corner. The refectory door looms ahead, slightly ajar, letting out a sliver of golden light and the unmistakable sound of someone ladling porridge with the energy of mild resentment. You bow gently as you enter. Everyone does, not out of reverence for the food, but because the rule says so, and because you've definitely knocked over a chair before by skipping it. You find your place. The benches here are marginally wider, the tables long and scrubbed nearly to memory. The meal is already waiting, a bowl of porridge, a crust of yesterday's bread, a cup of water that tastes like yesterday's bell. No one speaks. A brother stands at the lectern, clearing his throat gently before beginning to read. Today, a sermon on humility. Again. You stir your porridge slowly and try not to take it personally. The spoon scrapes the bowl. The reading drones on. You chew. You swallow. You reflect. On oats. On obedience. On whether Brother Benedict is sneaking honey again. He's definitely chewing with enthusiasm. The meal ends with a prayer. Always. You nod, you rise, and you head out into the courtyard. The sky is just now turning blue, and you still have dirt to move. You step into the courtyard, blinking against the gray-blue sky that finally acknowledges the existence of dawn. The sun isn't up yet, but the light has shifted just enough to reveal the damp glisten of moss on stone, the faint imprint of sandals in morning dew, and the quiet determination of Brother Walter, already halfway to the garden, with a hoe balanced over one shoulder. You sigh. You follow. A mainstream historical fact. Monks in the Middle Ages divided their days between prayer, study, and manual labor, farming, building, brewing, copying texts, and occasionally herding particularly uncooperative geese. Work was seen not as a burden, but as a form of prayer itself, a continuation of devotion through effort. You arrive at the garden plot, where rows of vegetables stand in suspicious silence. Cabbages again. Always cabbages. You grab a rake and begin, gently disturbing a particularly philosophical snail. The ground is damp, clumpy, uncooperative. You rake, you dig, you mutter a psalm half aloud, hoping it counts. Brother Walter hums something that sounds vaguely liturgical, but you suspect is actually a tune about turnips. Nearby, a hen clucks with judgmental precision. She knows. She remembers. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some monastic gardens had designated sections for medicinal herbs and were planned with almost obsessive detail. Lavender, fennel, sage, and rue. Names that sound more like a folk band than a pharmacy. Some monks believed the placement of certain plants influenced their potency. Others just liked the symmetry. You shovel compost from one corner to another with the spiritual conviction of a man who once saw St. Jerome in a carrot. The bell rings faintly in the distance, not for prayer, but to mark the work hour. The timing is precise, not because anyone is watching, but because everyone is. You glance up to see a flock of geese waddling past in a kind of feathered procession. Brother Allen is behind them, herding gently with a stick and a voice that would calm most earthquakes. He nods to you. You nod back. There is solidarity in poultry management. Later, you haul buckets of water from the well to the field. The buckets are heavy. Your robe is wet. You suspect this is intentional. You adjust your belt, grumble something about divine plumbing, and tip the water carefully over a row of parsnips, who clearly didn't ask for it. And just like that, it's mid-morning. The sun is up now. The sweat has started. The sleeves are rolled. You find yourself leaning on a spade, squinting toward the horizon, like a man contemplating a better compost pile. You pass by the tool shed, really more of a sanctified pile of rakes, and retrieve a small trowel. A brother is already working in the herb garden, gently pinching mint leaves and whispering sweet nothings to the basil. You think he once took a vow of silence, just to avoid being assigned to cabbage duty. You kneel in the soil and begin clearing weeds from a patch of onions. The onions are smug. The weeds are persistent. Your knees protest loudly. Historians still argue about just how much food medieval monasteries produced themselves and how much was bought or donated. Some orders lived almost entirely off their land. Others bartered with local villages. Either way, breakfast didn't magically appear. Someone weeded for it. The bell rings again. You brush dirt from your sleeves and stand. Your hands smell of time and effort. And now, it's time to clean the ink stains off your fingers. Because this monastery, it believes in multitasking. You leave the herb garden with the dignified limp of someone who has just spent 2 hours discussing theology with an especially sarcastic thistle. Your hands are raw. Your robe smells faintly of compost and modest ambition, and the trowel you forgot to return is now mysteriously wedged into your belt like a very humble sword. The bell chimes again, not the call to prayer this time, but the call to ink. You follow the corridor to the Scriptorium, that dim, disciplined chamber where devotion is measured in pages, and the only war is against poor handwriting and rogue inkblots. A mainstream historical fact. The Scriptorium was the heart of intellectual labor in a medieval monastery. Monks copied texts by hand, scripture, theology, classical literature, and occasionally shopping lists disguised as psalms. This work was slow, meticulous, and occasionally tragic when someone sneezed on page 94. You take your place at the long wooden desk. Your chair is just uncomfortable enough to inspire good posture, but not quite painful enough to merit confession. A sheet of parchment lies before you, smooth, expectant. Beside it, ink pot, goose quill, and a blotter that has seen things. You dip your pen. You begin. The Latin letters unfold slowly under your hand, beautiful, rigid, full of little flourishes that make the Holy Spirit look like it's doing a backflip. You copy with care, mumbling each phrase to yourself. The words blur slightly in places, not from fatigue, but because Brother Aldrich keeps lighting the wrong corner of the room, and now half your desk is in spiritual darkness. Here's your quirky tidbit. Monks sometimes inserted doodles in the margins. Tiny cats, dragons, and disgruntled monks muttering at the edge of the page. One famous manuscript features a monk's note. "It is cold today." Another simply says, "I am so very tired." Relatable. You pause, flex your fingers. The knuckles crack like miniature thunderclaps. You glance down and realize you've accidentally inked your sleeve. Again. That's the third time this week. At this point, the pattern is starting to look decorative. You sigh. You correct a letter. You cross another. Your fellow scribes mutter softly. One coughs. Another shifts and knocks over his inkwell. No one reacts. This is the Scriptorium way. Life is fleeting. Ink stains are eternal. Historians still argue whether these manuscripts were collaborative or solitary, whether a single monk would copy an entire Bible, or just a section. The truth likely varied, depending on resources, abbots, and how often someone dropped a candle. You push on. Another paragraph. Another psalm. You briefly lose your place after a moth lands on your manuscript. You attempt to brush it away. It sits defiantly on the phrase, miserere me. You take the hint. Mercy. Eventually, the bell rings again. You blow gently on the last line. The ink glistens. You set down your quill with the reverence of someone who has just written the exact same sentence 15 times in perfect alignment. You stretch. You wince. You rise. The Scriptorium exhales collectively. Cloaks rustle. Chairs scrape. You leave the chamber with fingers tinged black, and the quiet joy of knowing that at least one psalm today survived your spelling. Outside, the light has shifted. The sun now slants through the courtyard, hitting the well at an angle that almost makes it sparkle. You walk past Brother Cedric, who smells like cheese. You wave. He nods solemnly, as though agreeing with your theological position on ink. You pass through the cloister walk, where a sparrow perches on a ledge and chirps a psalm of its own. And just like that, it's midday. Time to eat. Again, the midday bell tolls with a kind of sleepy finality, echoing through the stone cloister like a particularly polite yawn. You make your way to the refectory once more, sandals scuffing softly on the floor. the hem of your robe catching on a stray piece of straw that may or may not have migrated from the cowshed. You enter the refectory through the narrow arch, bowing slightly, mostly out of habit, partly because last time you didn't, you nearly collided with the lectern. The benches are already half full, the scent of stew, stale bread, and quiet obligation wafting through the hall like a very pious soup. A mainstream historical fact. Monks ate most meals in silence, seated in communal halls where a designated reader would recite scripture, hagiography, or moral lessons while the others ate. This practice turned meals into extensions of the liturgical rhythm, nourishment for the body paired with, arguably less tasty, nourishment for the soul. You find your place, same seat as yesterday, and the day before, possibly the rest of your life. Before you, a bowl of thick vegetable stew, flecked with what you hope are lentils and not pebbles, a small round of bread, a cup of water with a faint taste of wood, as if the cup has been reflecting on trees for too long. The reader for today is Brother Julian, whose voice has two speeds, medieval chant and distant wind. He clears his throat, which takes longer than expected, then begins reading about the spiritual significance of figs. You stir your stew. Here's your quirky tidbit. Medieval monastic rules often dictated not only what monks could eat, but how they ate. No slurping, no talking, no chewing too loudly. One particularly strict order forbade using both hands on a loaf of bread, lest one appear greedy. You, naturally, use elbows. You chew slowly, trying not to crunch anything that crunches back. Brother Thomas, to your left, is expertly balancing a spoonful of stew while nodding along to the reading. You suspect he's memorized the fig lecture. Halfway through your meal, a thought occurs. This stew tastes exactly like the one from last week, and the week before. This is not a surprise. You take a sip of water. It is exactly water. Nothing more. Nothing less. The reader drones on. A paragraph about the Desert Fathers. A tangent about moral clarity found through root vegetables. A brief pause while he hiccups. Then, a seamless return to Latin. The meal ends the way all monastic meals do, with a prayer and a unified scraping of benches as everyone rises at once. You bow again at the door, this time not hitting anything. Progress. Outside, the sun is at its peak. The shadows have retreated beneath the arches. You return your cup to the washing table, where Brother Felix is already sorting spoons by size, holiness, and apparent chew damage. You thank him. He nods. You're not sure he speaks at all. He may be a kitchen spirit in disguise. You walk slowly through the cloister garden, letting the meal settle into that space between hunger and memory. A bee lands on your sleeve. You bless it. It leaves. The bell rings. Again. It's time for none. And you're almost sure you'll stay awake this time. Almost. You head back toward the chapel, stomach full of stew and morality, robe swishing slightly from the last turn in the cloister. The sun hangs just above the tiled roofline, softening into the kind of afternoon glow that suggests naps and quiet regret. But instead, it's none. Mid-afternoon prayer. Named after the Latin nona hora, the 9th hour of the day, though depending on how many bells you've endured, it may also be the hour of subtle dozing. A mainstream historical fact. None was one of the canonical hours prayed between mid-afternoon and early evening. In monastic communities, it marked both the spiritual and temporal decline of the day, when the work paused again and the silence thickened, like soup. You enter the chapel. Again. You bow. Again. You take your seat, which by now feels personally haunted. A bench worn just enough to be familiar, but never quite comfortable. A few pages of scripture lie open on the lectern, guarded by a brother who looks as though he's been awake since Matins. He probably has. The chant begins. You join in. Your voice is low, humming more than singing, the Latin syllables slipping past your teeth like tired bees. You focus on the rhythm, not the meaning. The drone pulls you along, a boat on a sleepy river of psalms. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some monastic orders required monks to stand and sit repeatedly during prayer services to maintain alertness. Others relied on the steady repetition of chant to lull the spirit into what was technically devotion, but practically an elaborate way to stay upright while meditating on how long it's been since breakfast. You try to follow the reading. You lose your place. You find it again. You catch Brother Stephen blinking too slowly to still be conscious. He jolts upright, as if the Holy Spirit just goosed him. You stifle a laugh. The chant moves on. You kneel. Your knees protest, but at this point they've given up arguing. You hear the scrape of wood, the rustle of robes, the soft squeak of sandals trying to be reverent. The air smells of candle wax and well-worn pages. The chapel's walls have heard these same verses for centuries. You think you hear one of them sigh. Historians still debate whether the practice of the canonical hours served more to regulate life or to spiritually elevate it. Some say it was sacred discipline. Others say it was a very polite way of organizing a group nap schedule. You rise with the others. The final chant is sung, trailing off into silence. None is complete. You step back out into the cloister, blinking against the brightness of the courtyard. The sun is leaning now, casting longer shadows. You still have chores. You always have chores. You pass by Brother Aldrich, who's walking a wheelbarrow full of bricks toward the wall that collapsed last winter. He nods. You nod. It's a conversation. You're assigned to help Brother Martin patch the outer wall, near the chicken yard. You don't ask why it's broken again. You already know. You arrive at the wall. The chickens are watching, judging. You collect mortar, a trowel, a few half-decent bricks, and begin. Scrape, slap, align, press, repeat. It's a rhythm you understand better than the Psalms. The chickens cluck loudly. One pecks your robe. You do not retaliate. You are a man of God. Brother Martin hums a tune that suspiciously resembles a drinking song. You pretend not to notice. You finish your portion of the wall. You step back. You admire your work. It's slightly crooked, but so is Brother Matthew, and everyone listens to him. The bell rings. You drop your tools into the wheelbarrow, shoo a particularly persistent hen off your sandal, and begin the walk back toward the cloister. Evening is coming, and you are one psalm closer to your pillow. You walk slowly now, the rhythm of the day easing into a gentle descent, like the last third of a hymn that everyone knows by heart. The sun is no longer overhead, but neither is it gone, just lower, casting a glow that gilds the edges of cloister arches and turns the garden into something almost holy. You pass a bucket. Inside it, turnips. Probably for tomorrow. You feel seen. The bell rings for vespers. Again. You turn toward the chapel, feet a little heavier, but robe just a bit looser from all the bending and wall patching. The chickens, at least, have lost interest in you. For now. A mainstream historical fact. Vespers, or evening prayer, was one of the major canonical hours. often regarded as a time of reflection and gentle unwinding. It was the golden hour of devotion, the pause before the night fully settled in, a quiet mirror to lauds, but with more ambient candlelight. You step into the chapel. Again. You know the route by now. Left foot over the threshold first, one step to avoid the squeaky flagstone, slight bow at the doorway, seat 3 from the back, right side. Someone else is in your spot. It's fine. You are spiritually mature. You sit beside Brother Simon, who has not yet learned how to hum at the correct volume. His enthusiasm is unmatched. His pitch is uncertain. The chanting begins. The voices rise together, soft and round, like wool in audio form. You follow. You forget the words halfway through a line. You pick them back up by osmosis. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some monasteries trained their choirs so precisely that a single mistake in the psalm tone would result in being sent to reflect in silence, or in one case, reassigned to root cellar inventory for a week. You don't mind the cellar, but you really don't like carrots. The candles flicker. The windows catch the last of the sunset. A pigeon coos from outside the chapel wall, with the kind of misplaced confidence usually reserved for bishops and ducks. The psalms roll on. Evening glows in every syllable. You feel your shoulders relax. Your feet slide forward slightly. The bench beneath you becomes familiar, in that way only well-used objects can be. Part of your day, like breath or bread. You kneel, slower now. Your joints offer gentle resistance, but no outright rebellion. The prayers shift from structure to gratitude, from form to feeling, not because the rules change, but because evening has that effect. Even when spoken in Latin, the words soften. The last antiphon drifts into silence. Vespers ends. You rise with the others, filing slowly out of the chapel. The air outside is cooler now, crisper. A breeze has slipped in while you were chanting, stirring the lavender and rosemary by the cloister path. You walk a loop through the garden before the final meal. The herbs sway slightly. The bees have gone to bed. One brother is still collecting water in a bucket with a hole. He hasn't noticed yet. You let him have the moment. The sun is gone now, but the light lingers. It always lingers. You find yourself standing beneath the fig tree in the corner of the courtyard. Its leaves rustle. You once tried to read under this tree. The chickens had other plans. You breathe in. You exhale slowly. You hear footsteps behind you. Sandals. Software. No rush. Just the slow return of monks preparing for broth, bread, and the last flickering verses of the day. You follow them. The final meal is waiting, and your spoon is almost clean. The dining hall smells faintly of broth, beeswax, and that mysterious blend of herbs Brother Felix insists is good for digestion. You step inside and take your place at the long wooden table, where a bowl of steaming liquid and a thick slice of brown bread await your return, like two slightly judgmental friends. This is the final meal of the day, lighter than lunch, simpler than breakfast, just enough to keep the night from being punctuated by stomach noises, loud enough to startle owls. You sit, you bow your head. The bell rings softly. No big declarations, just a chime to remind everyone that God is watching, and also that the lentils are cooling. A mainstream historical fact. The final meal in a monastic day, often taken after Vespers and before Compline, was deliberately sparse. Some orders practiced near-complete fasting in the evenings. Others allowed broth, fruit, or bread. Talking was still restricted, usually replaced with readings from scripture or a saint's biography that, unfortunately, had very little to say about seasoning. You raise your spoon. You sip. It's lentils. It's always lentils. This batch is saltier than usual. A gift or an accident. You glance across the table and see Brother Matthew looking smugly innocent. You raise your eyebrows. He shrugs in Latin. Here's your quirky tidbit. In some monasteries, monks were allowed to write anonymous recipe suggestions in a small kitchen ledger. One note simply read, "Less cabbage. Please." It was underlined 5 times. The evening reader begins. Tonight's passage is from the life of St. Cuthbert. You already know this one. The part where he stands in the sea all night praying while otters warm his feet. You resist the urge to ask whether anyone's tested the theology of seal-based miracles. The hall is quiet, except for the scrape of spoons and the occasional polite cough. The bread is dry, but blessed. You soak it in the broth. It softens into something vaguely edible. You pretend it's a miracle. You eat slowly, matching your pace to the reader's voice. Not because you're disciplined, because you've learned the hard way that finishing early just means more time spent trying to look thoughtful while digesting. The reader finishes. You bow your head again. A short grace, a brief rustle of robes, then silence as everyone begins filing out. You scrape your bowl, not out of gluttony, out of habit. Every morsel matters. Every crumb is part of the rule. Also, Brother Felix will definitely lecture you if he finds waste. You rinse your spoon in the stone basin outside, dry it on your robe, and tuck it back into its designated pouch. You've never named it, but you definitely have favorites. The sky above is dark now. The stars are beginning their slow performance. You walk a lap through the cloister, counting the lanterns flickering in the chapel windows. 1, 2, 3. One snuffed out. Someone got sleepy. The breeze carries the scent of barley, wood smoke, and the faintest hint of incense left over from the morning. Or maybe that's just your sleeve. You pause by the fountain. It's quiet. Just a slow drip from the mossy lip. You wonder if it's ever stopped. Probably once. During the Great Freeze of '87. Brother Ambrose still talks about it like it was the apocalypse. You linger. Your belly is full enough. Your thoughts are light. You head toward the dormitory, the candle in your hand bouncing slightly as your sandals whisper over the stone path. The next bell will come soon. Compline. Then sleep. Then the whole cycle again. But first, a final prayer, and perhaps the tiniest bit of snoring. The chapel is dim now. Only the flicker of Compline candles lights the air, casting soft shadows that stretch like sleepy fingers across the worn flagstones. You step inside, and the hush deepens, as if even the dust motes are holding their breath. This is the last prayer of the day, a kind of spiritual tucking in. You file into your place, familiar by feel, if not sight. You've been here before. You'll be here again. A mainstream historical fact. Compline was the final office of the monastic day, often brief and always reverent. It included prayers of forgiveness, psalms, and the famous Nunc Dimittis, the Canticle of Simeon. Monks would end the day in total silence from this point onward, save for the occasional cough or creaking floorboard. You cross yourself. You bow. The prior begins the chant, voice low and smooth, like someone reciting a lullaby into a cavern. You join in, your voice blending with the others in a sea of semi-synchronized Latin. You try not to let your mind wander to the fact that you almost tripped over your own habit on the way in. Again. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some monasteries employed what was known as a night watch monk, whose sole duty was to remain alert while the others slept, just in case divine revelation or fire decided to arrive unannounced. This monk often walked the halls with a candle and an expression that said, "Yes, I'd rather be dreaming too." You kneel. The bench is hard, but your knees don't mind as much as they did at Lauds. They've adapted. You close your eyes, half listening, half memorizing. You mouth the words out of habit more than understanding. They rise and fall in a cadence that no longer needs your active attention. The final hymn begins. It's slow, gentle, the kind of song that wants nothing from you except to follow. You stand again, bowing low for the last time today. Then you turn, moving single file through the chapel's narrow side door, the one reserved for nighttime departures. Outside, the cloister is bathed in silence. Not the absence of sound. There's always the owl, always the wind, but the presence of stillness. You walk in silence toward your cell, the candles in your hand guttering in the breeze. The shadows of the columns glide beside you, like quieter versions of yourself. Inside your cell, the straw mattress waits, the same as always, firm, uncomplaining, and filled with aspirations of being a cloud. You set your candle in the niche by the door. It throws a warm oval of light across the small wooden crucifix and your half-read psalter. You sit on the edge of the bed, tugging your boots off slowly. You sigh. It's the kind of sigh that's less about exhaustion and more about exhaling the weight of the day. You kneel once more. One last prayer. Brief, familiar, a whispered request for rest, a touch of protection from the night, and perhaps, just perhaps, forgiveness for falling asleep during none. Again, you blow out the candle. The room plunges into darkness. The wind presses gently at the shutters, and you lie back, your arms folded loosely across your chest, your ears still echoing with faint Latin syllables, your mind floating in the rhythm of the bells. You don't need to remember what comes tomorrow. You already know. You wake not to a bell, but to the creak of the rafters, wood stretching under its own ancient memory. Your cell is still dark, save for a faint silver edge under the shutters. The air smells of wool, old pages, and something like humility, if humility had a scent. The day hasn't begun yet. Technically, it's still last night. You sit up slowly. The straw rustles beneath you. You blink, stretch. One toe finds the cold stone floor. The other pretends not to notice. There's no rush, and yet everything in the monastery happens exactly when it should. That's the magic, or the discipline, or the slow tyranny of bells, depending on your mood. A mainstream historical fact. Monastic cells were often small, barely large enough for a bed, a prayer stool, and perhaps a shelf. The simplicity wasn't punishment, it was protection. Fewer distractions meant fewer temptations, though dust, it seems, was exempt from this spiritual austerity. You light your candle, shielding the flicker with your hand. The flame reflects in your metal wash basin, casting soft light across your folded robe. You splash your face with cold water. It is awake now. You dress. Robe first, then belt. Then the sandals you left precisely in position last night, because you've stepped into the wall too many times to pretend it's accidental. You check the psalter on your shelf. The bookmark, made of knotted twine, is still stuck in Psalm 42. You smile, still thirsting, always thirsting. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some monks personalized their cells by arranging their few permitted items in exact configurations. It wasn't just habit, it was liturgical feng shui. One well-documented case included a monk who aligned his candle book and spoon, with the points of the cross. He claimed it helped his digestion. No one argued. You step into the corridor. The candlelight bounces ahead, pulling shadows with it. No voices, just the soft shuffle of sandals in other hallways. The monastery stirs like an old cat, quietly, but inevitably. You pass Brother Elias's door. He hums even in his sleep. A miracle or a condition, hard to say. You pass the window that overlooks the cloister garden. Even in the dark, the herbs look orderly. Sage waits for morning sun. Lavender, already holy by smell alone. You reach the chapel door just as the bell sounds. You smile, not because it's joyful, but because it's familiar. The others arrive around you, faces half lit, robes still wrinkled, expressions still holding on to sleep. But their feet know where to go. Their mouths remember the words. You take your seat. The service begins, and just like that, you are part of it again. Folded into the day, like a note in a hymn book. Not because you are special, but because you are here. And in a monastery, that is more than enough. You step back out into the cloister after Matins, blinking into a sky that's finally beginning to admit it's morning. The east wall glows pink, like someone lit a candle behind the horizon. The air is sharper now, bracing and full of things yet to be done. Raking, weeding, mending, probably apologizing to the cellarer for miscounting beans again. But first, you walk. A slow lap through the cloister garth, square, neat, ringed with columns that drip with dew and old stone patience. The grass is damp underfoot. The lavender leans sleepily toward the sun. You trail a hand along the low wall, your fingertips brushing the mossy curve where so many robes have swept before. A mainstream historical fact. The cloister was the heart of the monastery, not just architecturally, but spiritually. It was a place of silence, reflection, and movement between prayer and labor. A liminal space, as the poets would say, though your abbot prefers quiet corridor that leads to things. You hear the echoes of other footsteps. A broom swishes somewhere. A bird calls out loud and rude. It gets no response. You pass the old sundial. It's decorative now, mostly used for muttering. Is it terse yet? And receiving the answer, no, but soon. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some monasteries had elaborate water clocks, built by monks who clearly wanted to keep time and also invent proto-science. Others relied solely on bells. One particularly creative order used a trained dog to bark on the hour. It was later excommunicated for excessive enthusiasm. You pass the refectory again. Quiet for now, save for Brother Felix whispering to his cheese wheels. You try not to make eye contact. It's best. You find yourself at the far corner of the cloister, where the wall opens onto the chapter house. Morning meetings happen here. Confession. Planning. Occasionally, debates about whether radishes count as a feast food. They don't. You made that mistake once. You lean against the column and watch the sky shift. It's a moment between bells, a space unclaimed by rule or obligation. The kind of moment that tastes like silence and damp rosemary. You stretch, carefully. Your back answers with a series of small theological complaints. Brother Hugh passes by with a bucket and a purpose. You ask no questions. You know better. The chapel doors remain open. A candle still flickers at the altar. Someone forgot it or left it on purpose. Either way, it burns. You walk once more around the garth, slower now, counting the paving stones. 38, 39, 40. You've counted them before. You'll count them again. It's not about the number. It's about the step. The bell rings, low and long, terse. You turn toward the chapel again. and the day folds back open, like a page you already know by heart. You shuffle back into the chapel for terce with a feeling that lands somewhere between déjà vu and spiritual déjà knees. This is the third time today you've stepped through this doorway, and somehow the candlelight looks exactly the same, like it's being looped by a particularly reverent projectionist. You take your place. Again. The chant begins. Again. You kneel. Again. A mainstream historical fact. Terce, or the third hour, was usually prayed around mid-morning, roughly 9 a.m. by modern standards. It commemorated the descent of the Holy Spirit at Pentecost, though for most monks, it also marked the first real shift from contemplative mourning to full immersion in the day's manual labor. You chant. It's Psalm 119 again, or at least one of the 100 fragments it comes in. You mouth the words with the slow momentum of someone who no longer fights them. They rise, fall, and settle into your bones. Brother Allen hits the wrong note, twice. You glance over. He doesn't notice. You admire his confidence. Here's your quirky tidbit. Many monasteries had a designated cantor who was responsible for keeping the music on track. If a monk sang off-key persistently, he could be quietly reassigned to less melodic duties, such as tending to the fish pond or copying tax receipts for the abbey's barley field rentals. You stand again. Terce ends. You file out, single file, as always. The day is in full swing now. Birds are singing aggressively. Someone's hammering in the workshop courtyard, either building a bench or expressing spiritual frustration with nails. You head to the refectory, not for food this time, but for tasks. The last meal left crumbs, and crumbs are no laughing matter. You grab a broom and begin sweeping the same floor that was swept yesterday and will be swept tomorrow. The floor appreciates the attention. After that, you help haul a bucket of leftover broth to the compost heap. The chickens follow you. One of them is definitely plotting something. You move faster. Once back in the cloister, you assist Brother Anselm with copying pages in the corridor's light. He's hunched, you're blinking, and together you form a living monument to squinting. The page is covered in neat black script until your inkwell tips over. You blot it with a sleeve. Brother Anselm raises an eyebrow so slow it should be considered a liturgical gesture. You whisper an apology, in Latin. It feels more sincere that way. Outside, the bell tower stands against the sky like a gentle architectural shrug. Always ringing, never explaining itself. You hear footsteps. Brother Cedric carrying a ladder, muttering about doves in the bell loft again. You do not volunteer to help. Instead, you find your way to the bench in the cloister garth, where the sun finally hits your lap just right. You sit. You sigh. You allow yourself a moment of theological vitamin D. The bell doesn't ring yet, so you wait. With your eyes half closed, you listen to the murmur of bees in the garden, the distant clank of kitchen tools, and the faint swish of habits brushing through stone. You don't need to know what time it is. The monastery will tell you. You rise from the bench as the bell chimes sext, a sound you now respond to like a well-trained, slightly overfed monastic dog. You dust off your robe and head once again toward the chapel. The shadows have shortened now, cast almost directly beneath your sandals. The light is bright, but soft. It's the hour of height, of hunger, of humility, and maybe, if you're lucky, of a nap afterward. A mainstream historical fact. Sext, the 6th hour, was traditionally prayed around noon. It marked the midpoint of the monastic day, a moment to pause, reflect, and, if you were particularly pious, offer your midday groaning directly to God via chant. You step inside the chapel. It's warmer now. The sun glints through the stained glass window, projecting a half-saint, half-rabbit shape onto the opposite wall, courtesy of some well-meaning but proportionally confused artisan. You kneel. Again. The floor does not get softer with familiarity. The chant begins. You try to focus. Really, you do. But lunch was light, and the silence is heavy, and Brother Gregory has started breathing like a particularly distressed accordion. You close your eyes, not in prayer, but in survival. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some monks fell asleep so often during sext that certain abbeys began assigning elbow partners, a fellow brother whose sole task was to gently nudge the drifting soul with a discreet prod. You've had 3 elbow partners this week. All of them left the job early. The psalms roll on. You murmur your part, sometimes a syllable behind. You hear a sneeze that might have been suppressed into a hymn. You soldier on. The final verse arrives. Your eyes open fully for the first time in 10 minutes. Sext ends. You shuffle back out into the courtyard. The heat has deepened. The birds have grown bolder. One of them is sitting on the sundial, clearly unimpressed by its shadow. You salute it. It ignores you. You take a short detour to the infirmary to check on Brother Martin, who twisted his ankle trying to outrun a goat. He claims divine intervention. You suspect poor footwear. Then back into the garden, where you find yourself assigned to help tie up beanstalks. It's meditative, repetitive, kind. You talk to the beans. No one judges you. Brother Felix appears briefly to inspect the compost. He nods once. You take this as high praise. You find a shady patch near the back wall, where the vines lean like tired old men. You sit. You breathe. You nearly nap. The bell rings again. None. Already? You rise. Again. The rhythm of the day is relentless and gentle and slightly absurd, but somehow it carries you, like a slow river with occasional theological debris. You pass the kitchen. The broth is already simmering. The bread is being sliced. Someone's whispering about tomorrow's reading. Someone else is trying to locate the extra spoons. You wonder briefly what you would have done if you hadn't joined the monastery. You can't remember. You reach the chapel doors once more. They creak the same way they always do. And you step inside, as you always do. Because this is how the day continues. Not dramatically, but faithfully. You return to your cell as the last threads of daylight begin to stretch across the stone floor, weaving gold into the dust and the corners. The chapel is behind you for now, the cloister nearly silent save for the occasional clatter of sandals or the low mutter of Brother Humphrey accidentally reciting tomorrow's psalm. It's almost time for bed. Not that you're ready, not that you ever are, but the monastery doesn't wait for readiness, only for bells. Your cell is cool, familiar, a rectangle of stone, a straw mattress, a prayer stool, and a shelf with 3 books you've read so often they might as well be part of your DNA. A mainstream historical fact. Monks in the Middle Ages slept in simple cells or dormitories. Beds were straw-stuffed, often shared wall to wall in open sleeping halls, especially in earlier monasteries. Private cells were a luxury, offered more for silence than comfort. You light your candle. The flicker dances across the crucifix hanging by your bed. You mutter a prayer under your breath, something between gratitude and surrender. You remove your sandals, gently this time. Last night, you stubbed your toe on the bed frame and swore so quietly, even the Virgin Mary would have needed a second listen. You sit, The mattress crunches. A few pieces of straw poke through the fabric. You pick one out. It's a bit of someone else's old pillow, possibly from the 12th century. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some monasteries had rotating mattress stuffing schedules, where novices were assigned to refill and fluff duties using fresh straw from the barn. The results were inconsistent at best. One chronicler simply described his bed as a pile of loud promises. You lie back, arms folded. The candle still glows beside you. You watch the shadows climb the wall like they're remembering something. Outside your small shuttered window, the moon has risen. You can't see it, but you know it's out there, watching the same world you chanted about hours earlier. You reach for the psalter on your shelf. Read one final verse. Half the time your eyes blur before you reach the end. Tonight's no different. You blow out the candle. The room disappears instantly. You listen. The wind. A cough. A faint snore from Brother Arnold, who insists he doesn't snore. He's wrong. The stillness of the monastery at night isn't silence. It's a quiet full of breath and memory. The slow settling of 1,000 small rituals. The sound of lives worn smooth by repetition. You shift. You sigh. You smile faintly. You are where you belong. In a bed made of straw. In a life made of rhythm. In a world wrapped in prayer. And soon, very soon, the bell will ring again. But not yet. You dream, just faintly, of bells. Not loud ones, not urgent. Just the soft, rhythmic chime that's wrapped itself around every hour of your waking life, now gently echoing through your sleep, like a lullaby written in bronze. Your eyes flutter open to darkness, not pitch black, the kind with edges, with shape. The faintest glow of moonlight sneaks through the narrow slit of your shuttered window. You can just make out the curve of the crucifix, the slope of your shelf, the ever-present lean of your slightly uncooperative straw pillow. You don't rise. There's no bell. Not yet. This is the hour between hours, when the monastery sleeps, when the rule is silence, when the world outside might still be spinning, but inside, everything simply rests. A mainstream historical fact. The monastic year was divided not just into days, but into seasons, feasts and fasts, fasts and feasts, layered over with saints' days, liturgical cycles, and the unchanging choreography of the canonical hours. It was a calendar of spiritual geology, layers of time pressed into structure. You lie there, wrapped in your robe, listening to the creak of wood as the building breathes. The wind moves like a whisper through the rafters. Somewhere, someone turns over. A cough, a sigh, then stillness again. Tomorrow will be like today, and like yesterday, and like last Lent, and the one before. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some monasteries celebrated the new year, not on January 1st, but on March 25th, the Feast of the Annunciation. Because why not start a year with an angelic announcement? Others simply noted the passing years in marginalia beside psalms. Year of the Great Frost. Year Brother Benedict dropped the communion loaf. Year the cat got into the ink. You smile. Not everything has to change. In fact, in this place, change is often viewed with polite suspicion. Your robe is the same. The prayers are the same. Even the porridge has achieved a kind of temporal continuity that would impress most philosophers. And somehow, in all that sameness, you found something you didn't expect. Peace. You close your eyes again. The bell will come. But not yet. Not quite. Let it wait a moment longer. Wind down. Now, as the cloister settles into its deepest hush, and even the moonlight seems to pause, let yourself settle too. The long day is behind you, full of prayer and porridge, sandals and silence, brick and breath and Benedictine rhythm. Let it all recede now. The bells, the cold floors, the way your knees complained during midnight. Let the walls fade to stillness. Let the old stone remember for you. This world of rule and rhythm, of chant and charcoal ink, is still here, waiting, always waiting. But you can let go for now. You've done enough for one day. You've risen with matins, chanted through lauds, tied up beans before terce, and recited forgiveness at compline. You've stepped through every hour like a pilgrim walk in a circle. And now? Now you're just breathing, just lying still, just becoming part of the hush. So breathe deeply. Let the rhythm slow. Let the monastery fold its silence gently around you, like a woolen cloak warmed by candlelight. There are no more verses tonight, no more pages to copy, no more chickens to redirect. Just the soft ticking of stars, and the certainty that morning will come, and the bell with it. But not yet. Now, dim the lights, and sleep well. End of script. Sweet dreams.